The wish list. Item 20. Alfie had never heard Nick Close say so much. Perhaps it was because he was talking to himself, so he felt it didn't count. He had ordered himself a slew of whiteboards on wheels, and had now arranged them as a screen around his desk and monitors. He was covering them in diagrams and notes, building a plan of the Stocking.Christmas system and how he was intending to infiltrate it. The idea was simple: to automate their wish list idea. They were going to turn the system against itself, to use its own complexity, exploit its own features in order to make it do the very thing it was designed to stop, to give away presents for free. First, they had to find the wishes. They'd worked out the bare bones of the search. They were looking for wish lists featuring toys, preferably cheap toys, small wishes made by small people. This last point was apparently important to Nick. His experience with the young collector, who was merely buying toys to display, not to play with, had made him determined to try and make sure the toys were going to children. He had therefore complicated the search. First, to look for toys that weren't usual collectibles, which mostly meant just filtering out action figures from the larger fictional franchises. Then he had a brainwave and started cross-referencing the links between the wish lists and accounts that bought more mundane children's goods: clothes, school stationery, wipeable tablecloths, and chore calendars for the fridge door. Houses, in other words, that might plausibly have children in. This had proved to be a complex undertaking, and the talking to himself had included a lot of swearing for a while. Apparently he did not approve of the methods of whoever had been building the codebase with which he was currently monkeying. Finally, he had a further brainwave and realized that he could turn the algorithm against itself, using the recommendation engine backwards to trace how it traced links between accounts to build an image of real-world social networks from the relationships between different people's buying habits. An idea that had flabbergasted Alfie, but which had at least stopped the swearing for a bit. This had meant he could move on to messing with the gift card system, getting it to create card numbers that didn't exist. This was, apparently, something of a sidetrack, but it seemed to please him. As far as Alfie could make out from his mutterings, this meant that he could place the orders for wish list items with imaginary gift cards rather than just straight up stealing them, hopefully making the whole project slightly less traceable in the system. Then there was the whole question of infiltrating the delivery system, trying to make sure that the orders weren't all happening at once but were instead spread out evenly across time and geography. This was one of the few times through all of this that Nick had actually spoken directly to Alfie, pausing to deliver a halting and largely incomprehensible lecture on the nature of randomness. Apparently, the problem with true randomness was that it didn't look random to humans, and to achieve the effect of randomness actually required deliberate intervention. Nick appeared to be momentarily distracted by this example of how humans are prevented by their own perceptions from perceiving factual reality, but then he remembered that he was more interested in writing his code and went back to talking to himself again. The other time he stopped to talk was to ask Alfie to provide some example text for the notes to go with the presents. They had realized quite early on that they needed something to reassure the recipients that these deliveries weren't mistakes that would need to be returned, or orders that they would have to pay for, but genuine gifts. What he wanted, apparently, was a selection of sentences so that the messages could be varied. Alfie wasn't sure why, something to do with bot detection, possibly, but he tried his best. He did not, as it turned out, quite try as hard as he could, or think quite as carefully about what he was doing as he might, but he was, in his defense, somewhat distracted himself. Looking at Nick's whiteboards, following his thinking, watching the mechanisms of Stocking.Christmas being anatomized before him, Alfie had a sudden, vertiginous sense of glimpsing the whole system. It was like lying on the grass on a still, hot summer's day and suddenly realizing that all around you was movement. The quick scurry of the ants around you, somewhere underneath you the slow creep of roots and fungi, high above clouds drifting on great shifting bodies of air, everywhere stretching into the blue distance, everything in motion. Like getting off a train at a major station and suddenly seeing all the rushing crowds as what they are, people. Each a whole person, a whole life, all moving past each other with their own dreams and disappointments and deadlines. Rushing for a forward-facing seat on the shady side of the train, back home, off out. Individual parts of a great movement, made unnoticeable by its very size. Alfie had always thought of the invisible, digital world around him as fundamentally mysterious, an unknowable, interlocking network of unfathomably complex systems, a technology so advanced as to be indistinguishable from magic. But now he felt like an ancient Babylonian astrologer getting a visit from Sir Isaac Newton, seeing in the stars not the mysterious passage of the gods, but the fierce and distant burnings of fearsome fires in the pitiless depths of the dark. Planets locked in an elliptical and convoluted clockwork, the workings of an elegant and predictable system so great and so detailed as to be unseeable. For a moment he glimpsed them, the toy coming off the factory lines in China, packed with all its identical copies into boxes, the boxes loaded onto trucks and trains, and then into that great synecdoche of 21st century consumerism, the shipping container. The vast and varied output of all the factories packed into a single monolithic block, the one-shape-fits-all of global logistics. Out onto the lonely living oceans, through storms and endless calm emptiness, queuing through the canal and squeezing through the straits. The containers unloaded, unpacked, the boxes repacked, reloaded, trains and trucks to the warehouse, the boxes opened, the toy finally taking its final journey down the conveyor to packing. And not just one toy, not just one box, not just one container, not just one ship or train or truck, hundreds, thousands, millions. The teeming movement and life of it all parts folded into a great and unknowable whole. Late December, and the Earth's axial tilt, swinging out on the far tip of its elliptical orbit, pushes the northern pole into the darkness of the winter solstice. This darkness is cold, and a movement in the Atlantic jet stream sucks in a bitter wind from the north, meeting the wet weather from the southwest, meaning that as the sun sets in mid-afternoon, it begins snowing. For a moment, Alfie saw them all. Astronomical system meeting meteorological, meeting logistical. The delivery vans travelling through that dark and snowy evening, up lanes, down cul-de-sacs, to houses where all the Christmas lights are on, and in every window stands a tree, lit up and decorated, and on every doorstep is left a present.
"There,"
said Nick finally.
"done."